What?
Take a look at the ocean.
Speak up, I can't hear you.
Once. Let it sink
Huh? Something about the ocean?
in. That fucking horizon over there? Do you see the horizon?
Whoa, okay.
That does not change no matter how high you go.
You're sure?
This is the 2025 Golden Crocoduck Award.
Welcome to the 2025 Golden Crocoduck Awards, given for the biggest breach of the Ninth Commandment in pursuit of the creationist cause. It's held every October 28th because this is the feast day of St. Jude Thaddeus, the patron saint of lost causes. We have 5 nominees this year, and I'll announce the winner at the end. The first one was nominated by one of my subscribers, but with no link, so I hope I've got the right nut job. As you can see, he's saying that he can't see any curvature when he's looking out at sea, so that must mean the Earth is flat. Yeah, it's one of those. According to this guy's theory, you can never see beyond the horizon, no matter how high you go, which of course is contrary to what everyone has experienced climbing a hill or taking off in an aeroplane. But that's what I love about creationist beliefs, so firmly entrenched, even though all it takes to disprove this one is to climb a hill. The higher you go, the further you can see, and that's why lighthouses are famously built tall. In fact, one of the earliest pieces of evidence that the Earth was curved was people on shore seeing the hulls of outgoing ships disappearing below the horizon before their masts. I could go on, but I think we can count this one as a myth busted. The next nominee is Glynn Barrett, a fellow Aussie.
A little while ago, I was invited to a university to speak at the Atheistic Society. They said, Pastor Barrett, we would like you to come and get involved in a debate with all the atheists. I said, fine. I said, what's the heading? Well, what's the caption? What are we debating on? And they said this, the debate is this, the premise is, there is no God. So I went down, I won't tell you which university it was, but I drove to Cambridge, and when I got to Cambridge, I go into this lecture hall, right? And there's, 1,800 students there, and the lead atheist, he gets up and he's preaching, and he's spitting, and he's frothing at the mouth.
Hang on, he's spitting and frothing? Okay, I'm sure that happened.
And he's eloquent, he's brilliant. How can any rational person believe that there is a God? You've got to be stupid to believe that there is a God, and all these sorts of things, all the things that you've heard. And then they said, and now we're going to get Glynn Barrett, he's going to come up and tell us why there is a God. Have you ever read the verse, led like a lamb to the slaughter? So I get up on stage and there's boos and hisses and all these sorts of things.
Now, there are a couple of things that made me suspect this debate didn't happen the way Barrett describes it. If we're talking about university level, atheist debaters have much better arguments than, how can any rational person believe there's a God? And you have to be stupid to believe there's a God. Yeah. That's not even an argument. Of course, an audience of believers think this concocted story is brilliant and absolutely true. But I found Barrett's description so unbelievable that I was determined to get hold of a video of the debate and show how he had exaggerated. Trouble is, I couldn't find one anywhere. Sure enough, the entire story was a porky pie, a breach of the Ninth Commandment. Barrett made the whole thing up. There's only one so-called atheist society at Cambridge University, and it's this one, the Cambridge University Atheist and Agnostic Society, and they say Barrett was never invited and the debate never happened. In fact, they hadn't even heard of Glynn Barrett until people started inundating their website with questions about this phantom debate. And according to the Society, the video you've just seen was pulled from Barrett's God TV Facebook page after his blatant lie was exposed. The next nominee is also preaching to an audience of the converted, and this is Darren Latham, who came up with another very familiar argument. What are the odds?
Each of these constants has to be intricately set at a level of specificity that is unfathomable. If all these, and these are just 3 of many, if all these dials were not specifically set at a specific number, intelligent life would not be able to exist.
I've debunked this shop-worn argument before, so let's skip ahead to where Latham rebuts the rebuttal.
Dawkins proposes that our universe isn't the only universe out there. Dawkins proposes that there are an infinite number of universes out there, what's called the multiverse. And there are billions and trillions and gazillions, infinite number of universes out there with every conceivable type of universe in existence. And by chance, by pure luck, we just happen to be in a universe that randomly produced life. Now, what evidence is there for this multiverse? This infinite number of universes, this world ensemble, as some people call it. What evidence is there for a multiverse? None.
Oh, so your argument against a multiverse idea, just an idea, is a lack of evidence. Whereas you're quite happy to believe that something else is absolutely 100% true, and you don't require any evidence. Well, at least atheists are honest enough to admit that the multiverse does lack substantive evidence, and it's just an idea, whereas creationists call the undetectable and invisible thing they worship absolutely true. But enough of the irony and hypocrisy. In fact, there is some evidence to support a multiverse, and that's quantum physics. It's not much to go on, but just one slender piece of positive evidence supporting an idea is a whole lot better than a wealth of evidence disproving a belief. And yes, I do mean disproving, because we now know that most of the actions attributed to this God never happened. The evidence clearly shows there was no worldwide flood, no Garden of Eden, and no animals magically springing to life together in a single day. If there are many universes, which is entirely possible, because after all we discovered only 100 years ago that there are trillions of galaxies, then the existence of our universe isn't luck, Darren, any more than it was luck that you were born from a single sperm that fertilized an egg, while millions of other sperm got washed away in the shower drain. That's why you're here to say you're here, while millions of other potential human beings aren't around to say they're here. So if there are an infinite number of universes, which is entirely possible, the only reason we can remark on how lucky we are to be here is because our universe survived and trillions of others didn't. Now, Darren Latham is a great example of creationist stupidity, not understanding basic math, but I wouldn't say a great example of mendacity, so there's no breach of the 9th commandment here, which makes him ineligible for a Golden Crocoduck. The next nominee is James Bambrick.
I think it's amazing that evolution has been put forward as this very secure scientific theory that basically can't be questioned or talked about in any other way than positively.
Who seems unaware that the theory of evolution is questioned and corrected all the time and has been modified since it was first proposed by Darwin and Wallace 150 years ago. It soon became clear that he doesn't actually know what the theory of evolution is.
So, what do we start off with in the theory of evolution? Well, we start off with nothing, right? Well, basically nothing, not quite nothing. It's called the singularity.
Yeah, spot the problem here? Singularity has nothing to do with the theory of evolution. It's part of another theory called cosmic inflation, colloquially known as the Big Bang Theory.
Okay, so that's stage one, right? Stage two is this. Stage two is the evolution of the elements.
No, that has nothing to do with the theory of evolution either, and elements didn't evolve, they were formed by nuclear fusion. If this misunderstanding of evolution sounds familiar, it's because these young internet preachers learned it from the old spinmeister himself, ex-jailbird, divorced husband, and former doctor from this university, Kent Hovind. He was the one who told a whole generation of young evangelists that the theory of evolution covers the entire history of the universe. And the reason he does that is because creationists have a very hard time disproving the theory of evolution. In fact, evolution is so obvious, they've even embraced it. Ken Ham thinks animals evolved, but he thinks all that was squeezed into a time period of about 6,000 years. He just doesn't call it evolution, he calls it change. And believe it or not, even Kent Hovind accepts evolution. He accepts that one kind of animal, separated into two different environments, can change over time to the point that they're so different they can't interbreed.
It could be that animals have diversified, like Alaska rabbits and Florida rabbits can no longer interbreed. Okay, but they're still obviously the same kind. They could originally interbreed.
And because they've accepted the theory of evolution, they just call it change, They have to pretend the theory of evolution is about something else.
And we're going to the creation, the evolution of life from non-life.
Can we please get onto the theory of evolution? Finally, here it is.
And that amoeba, or whatever it was, suddenly just became an insect. Like, just decided, I'm going to be an insect now.
Okay, so either you're one of the 90% of people laughing and face-palming at this guy's complete ignorance, his first grade Sunday school understanding of biology, or you're one of the 10% who think this really is the theory of evolution and can't understand why the other 90% are laughing. I won't explain why the theory doesn't postulate that an amoeba can suddenly decide to turn into an insect. Just go to my video, Natural Selection Made Easy, or The Theory of Evolution Made Easy, where this is explained.
Once again, all of this happened very long ago, and it's very hard to prove, and slightly unfortunately didn't leave any fossil record.
Well, except for the millions of fossils that show this evolution clearly happened over time as you go from older to younger sedimentary rocks. So Derry Boy here is rightfully nominated for several breaches. His claim that the theory of evolution has something to do with singularity and atomic fusion, his laughable idea that the elements evolved and that there's no fossil record of evolution, and that according to the theory of evolution, an amoeba suddenly decides to become an insect. Okay, let's jump up 100 points in IQ and go from the dumbest nominee this year to someone who ought to be the smartest. Here's Professor. Hold your enthusiasm. Atheists eat creationist professors for breakfast. Here's Professor Keith Moore speaking to an audience in Saudi Arabia about how the Quran miraculously predicted what we now know about the stages of fetal development.
Little was known about the staging and classification of human embryos until the 20th century. For this reason, the descriptions of the human embryo in the Quran cannot be based on scientific knowledge in the 7th century. The only reasonable conclusion is that these descriptions were revealed to Muhammad from God.
Really? God revealed that a blob of semen contained millions of sperm, and that one of these sperm fertilized an egg, and that this started a process of cells dividing and multiplying? All this is in the Quran? Well, if we read the Quran, no. This is what it actually says.
This is from Surah Tariq 6. He is created from a drop emitted. This Arabic term refers to the forceful emission of fluids which occurs during ejaculation in the male and ovulation in the female. The male secretions, called semen, contain the spermatozoa, and the female secretions, called follicular fluid, contain the ovum.
Now, it may sound as though the Quran has the embryonic process pretty much nailed. How did the writers of the Quran know all this unless it had been revealed to them by God? The answer is they didn't. Moore isn't reading from the Quran. He wrote all this himself, based on what he learned from biology textbooks. The only part from the Quran is that a baby starts with a drop of semen called a nutfa. That's it. That's all they knew. There was no mention of ovulation or spermatozoa or follicular fluid. Moore wrote all that himself.
This is the stage of fertilization and the nutfa, and after this is what we call the zygote, referred to in the Quran as the nutfa, and the nutfa undergoes division, which we call cleavage, as it passes down the uterine tube.
And no surprise, the Quran doesn't mention any of this either. It doesn't mention fertilization or zygotes or cell division or fallopian tubes. All the Quran says is that this drop of semen congeals into a kind of clot called an alaka, the same word for a leech. Which isn't a bad guess, it just happens to be completely wrong. Semen doesn't congeal into a clot which turns into a baby, it gets flushed away. Moore's answer to this inconvenient fact is to assign the word nutva to just about everything. So there we go, 1 disqualified and 4 worthy nominees. Well, I'm not going to keep you in suspense. Let's open the sealed envelope and see who wins this year's coveted Golden Crocoduck. And the winner is It has to be Glynn Barrett for his ridiculous, fictitious claim that he took part in a debate at Cambridge University, complete with made-up spitting and frothing, made-up boos and hisses, and of course resulting in a made-up victory, in which he completely trounced his made-up opponent. I mean, I know that the only way creationists can ever win these debates is to twist, embellish and exaggerate, but in Glynn Barrett's case, he was quite prepared to invent the entire thing from scratch and confidently face an audience with a bold-faced breach of the 9th Commandment. I mean, if that doesn't deserve an acting award, at least it deserves a Golden Crocoduck. So what was the argument that would have crushed these Cambridge University atheists in under 2 minutes, if it had actually happened? Well, in Barrett's imagination, it starts with him taking his imaginary opponent to a whiteboard and drawing a circle.
I said, this circle represents knowledge. Everything that could ever be known about any subject fits in there. How much do you know of everything that could possibly be known? So he took a pen and he drew that and he went, I reckon I know this much. I said, wow, you're intelligent. He said, yeah, I am. I said, that's brilliant. I said, so that's what you do know? He said, yes. I said, and that's what you don't know? He said, yes. But this does exist, you just haven't discovered it yet. Yes. Therefore, could God not exist in a dimension that you haven't yet discovered?
And the answer, of course, is no, because as we've seen, the stories about the God of the Bible, like him flooding the world and breathing to life all the animals and plants, never happened. And that pretty much goes for every religion. The feats of these imaginary gods aren't hard to disprove. By the way, what this elaborate circle and percentages rant actually boils down to is this: we don't know everything. He could have just said that. It's one of the oldest and dumbest religious arguments out there, called the God of the Gaps. But look at how brilliant the creationist audience thinks it is. What they don't know, and what I haven't told you yet, is that this isn't just an old shop-worn argument. What they don't know is that Barrett seems to have lifted the entire story from another preacher, Mark Finley.
The president of a university, a communist university in Czechoslovakia, Hungary, came and he said, we want you to come and speak at this university. And so I said, fine.
I said, fine.
You have to speak for 1 hour and show that there's a God from astronomy. Then our astronomer is going to speak for 1 hour and show why there is no God.
And he will share for 15 minutes on how there is no God, and then we're going to give you 10 minutes to prove to us that there is a God.
And I said, let's say that knowledge is a body of 100%. Would you say that your students know 90% of all there is to know in the world? They said, no. I said, let's say your students know 5%. Just from an intellectual standpoint, they said, well, Dr. Finley, they don't know 5%, but I'm going to give them 5%. If your students know 5% of all there is to know, it means that they don't know 95% of all there is to know. Intellectually, is that a good argument? Could it be possible that God exists in the 95% of the knowledge they don't have? So you're not an atheist. At best, you're an agnostic.
Therefore, sir, I would suggest you're not an atheist, you're an agnostic.
So well done, Glynn. Not just one, but 2 commandments breached in the same performance. And that's it for this year's Golden Crocoduck. My videos don't come often, but please keep subscribed, keep watching the channel, and please keep supporting the charity that I endorse in lieu of a Patreon account or monetization. Details are in the video description, so please take a look. Thanks to all those who will donate or who have already donated.